This episode will be held in English. Estamos de volta para o segundo episódio dedicado à Lei das Startups. Mais uma vez, António Queiroz Martins, Catarina Almeida Andrade, Luís Roquete Geraldes e Maria Gouveia falam sobre o possível impacto que esta lei vem trazer.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast at Morais Leitão and the second and final episode focusing on the new startup law. So on our first episode, we spoke about the main aspects of this new legislation, and now we will dive into the fine print and beyond, actually, I think, and discussing the challenges, the unaddressed topics, as well as possible future developments. So, Maria, I think we can all agree that this is a great step forward in the right direction, but what do you foresee to be the main challenges when addressing this new legislation?
Thank you, Katarina. I totally agree. This is a very, very, very interesting law, which entails a lot of advantages and will certainly incentivize stock option attribution and improve the startup ecosystem and will ease hiring new talents in Portugal. But still, it raises some challenges. And the first one relates with timing constraints as regards which plans will be included within the scope of this new legislation. Notably, plans that are already in place. If it is clear that regarding plans where the attributing entity is a startup that were approved back in 2022 or even before, it is not unclear, or at least the law gives rise to some doubts as regards plans that may be approved by micro entities or small entities, medium, small mid-cap entities as well. So there is still some room for clarification as regards the time where the plan was approved and whether it is included or not in this new legislation. The second topic that may entail some doubts relates with the use mainly of domestic concepts such as what is an R&D entity, what is a startup, which only relates with the Portuguese legislation, and also to EU law that was transposed into the domestic legislation. What about holding companies that are in the UK or the US, as several situations that exist, or even when there is no legal entity in Portugal, but the employer is a non-resident entity, or even tougher, a non-EU company. Those doubts are not easy to answer, and may still raise some challenges in what regards the application of the new law. And one last question that is still not answered is: what if when the attributing entity is not coincident with the Portuguese employer? Will those employees be included in the new tax regime or not? Those questions are still not answered, but we will certainly focus into this.
Maria, I think that reality always outranks the legal regime, and what is the fallback regime? Do you feel that there are any major issues that play an important role for startups that have remained unaddressed?
Sure. Thank you, Katarina. Well, lawyers tend to be critical, right? So we tend to have doubts everywhere and to be critical about the entire situation. But I'd like, on a very positive note, as Maria already put it, I'd like to focus on four main aspects. One is the contractor's situation. The second one is the founder's situation. The third aspect is the board members case, and then finally on the exit tax that is enacted by this law. So first of all, addressing the contractor situation, I believe there is an opportunity that is lost of regulating these matters. So basically, allocating stock options to employees is regulated from a tax perspective, whilst if the same stock option is granted for a contractor, it is not directly regulated. So we have to come up with some with some case to have a clear-cut solution to the case. And in the end of the day, the solution is not similar, so it's not balanced. There is, I'd say, a trend to harm or to not benefit as much as possible the contractors. Second, I'd like to address the founder's position. So basically, in initial draft version of this bill, a 10% limitation was put in the law. Then it was increased to 20%, which is very good. So we applaud that movement. However, I would say that probably it makes no sense to have this limitation. It is true that from a practical perspective, we know that we could say the vast majority of founders would be in scope, so they would not be affected by this limitation. However, probably there is not, I would say, a very strong argument from a policy perspective to have this limitation. Finally, and segue these two aspects, the exclusion of the board members, I would say it's almost outrageous. So it is a legacy that is, I'd say, historically not very well treated from a tax perspective in Portugal, and instead of correcting the past history, it reinforces the same problem. Basically, what we are saying is that board members are excluded from benefiting this regime whenever they are granted stock option regime, and that doesn't make any sense. As Maria put it, this regime is very important for talent retention, and this exclusion goes precisely in the opposite direction. And finally, a very technical point, but this law enacts an exit tax, basically simulating that whenever an individual relocates from Portugal to another state, it is deemed to sell its options. So we are speaking about a regime that is looking to align the cash position with the use of the option, and this specific provision, so this specific exit tax regime does exactly the opposite. So having in mind that we are addressing, I'd say, a highly mobile audience. So I'd say a highly mobile talent pool that is migrating from Portugal to the UK, to Estonia, to other European countries and abroad. It makes no sense to impose such a limitation. Well, and having this in mind, and because not only taxes rule the world, I'd like to give back to you, Luis. After having discussed this new regime during 2 episodes, how would you wrap up this legal regime?
Thank you, Antonio. It's a very good question. I think there's a couple of points that we need to make. The first one is this is incredibly promising. Secondly, it's probably misnamed in the sense that we're calling it startup law, but it actually includes, I would say, the vast majority of Portuguese companies are eligible for these purposes in a sense, in one way or another. So not having dry income, or not having taxation on dry income at the rates that we're talking about will foster the creation of what people typically call local tribes. And I think that's incredibly important for especially a small ecosystem such as Portugal. We've seen that with Estonia. We've seen that with obviously in the US and in Israel. Israel would probably be a good example as well. When you have local successes, people basically start to reinvest and you start having serial entrepreneurs, and that's a game-changing moment for any ecosystem. So I think the point is, clearly there's always room for improvement. As Maria and you have obviously touched upon, there's issues on exit tax, issues on members of the board, there's issue on certain qualifications, but this is clearly a step in the right direction, and it sets the tone from a regulatory perspective, to use the startup definition or the scale-up definition or any other eligibility criteria, if you will, for other improvements that you need to put forward in the future. So it does not only is very, very relevant now, but it sets the tone for the future. So I think it's a very positive note. I'm very optimistic about this. It's a very good regulatory milestone.
Thank you, Luís, for this wrap-up. Thank you, Catarina. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, all of you who are back there at home listening to us. Thank you very much.